Hello again. We're in Nelson Barbour, Charles Taze, Russell, Three Worlds, Plan of Redemption, page 99. And here we've just had Barbour's take on the 70 years, which we now realize is the fatal error underlying the 1914 error, the 607 last generation error, which is still with us. It's the last piece of all the pieces that have already crumbled away of the chronology of Nelson Barbour. The Watchtower, of course, is beholden to this idea for their justification of self, i.e. their self-identity as the faithful and discreet slave. It all goes back, though, to Barbour's error about the 70 years. The 70 years has to be, according to his thinking, the years of desolation of the land. And we'll deal with that more when we get into the latter part here. Right now he's still obsessing over the 50-year cycles, that is the Jubilee cycles, which he thinks point to the year 1875. He says, in order to continue their system of Jubilee cycles until its fulfillment, there must needs be a larger cycle, since the smaller ones have long since ceased. And as the fifth Sabbath, or seventh year, was multiplied into itself, that is 7 times 7, to bring them to the sixth Sabbath, or typical Jubilee, so there is no other way to measure the seventh, the final great Jubilee Sabbath to which all the others point, but to multiply the sixth, or Jubilee Sabbath, into itself. I'm not sure I can follow that, but he goes on. The 50 times 50 is 2,500, and measuring from the last Jubilee, or 19 years before, BC 536. Now this seems to be wrong. 19 years before 536. I think he means 19 years before 606, 70 years before what he thought of as the end of the desolation period. Their last Jubilee, 19 years before BC 536, would terminate in AD 1875. But it may be said we have no positive instruction to carry out this system of Sabbaths to its fulfillment. This I grant, but positive instruction always ends with the letter of the law. What the law teaches is something beyond the mere letter. We all understand that the slaying of a lamb on the evening of the 14th of the first month was designed to teach something beyond the letter, and that the spiritually minded Jew was supposed to see his Messiah in those types. Here is just where the Jews failed. The word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you shall seem to come short of. That's from Hebrews 3:19 and 4:1 and 2. The Jew, in his unbelief, saw only the letter, and nothing to which the law pointed. In other words, he saw nothing that in and of itself was of any value. Hence it did not profit him. And would you too fall after the same example of unbelief? If so, you will, in the present case, stop with the typical Jubilees. I shall look forward to what those Sabbatic cycles were designed to teach, and thus labor to enter into that rest. And as I am sure the system of Jubilees were designed to teach the great final Jubilee, or restitution of all things, and also I'm sure the system of multiples was not only a jot but a big part of the law, cannot pass away until it is so fulfilled. I shall, and do, plant my faith, not on the law, but on what the law and the prophets teach. If you love me, keep my commandments. Search the scriptures, for they are they that testify of me, and they testify of him, not so much in the letter as in their true meaning. The Lamb testified of Christ. The Jubilee, or restitution, testifies of him whom the heaven must receive until the times of restitution of all things. Think not that merely honoring the name of Christ you can enter into that rest, while harboring in your heart the very unbelief that shut out the Jew. It is not your church record, but God's word that shall judge you in that last day. So here he's directly linking the fulfillment of the law to the second presence idea. It gets more precise in a minute. As the last typical Jubilee ended 19 years before the 70 years desolation began, you will readily see that by adding the 19, the 70, and 536 to AD 1875, you get 2,500, the total of 50 times 50. Hence, by this argument, we have already entered the times of restitution of all things, at which time the return of Christ is due. For we learn that when Christ had ascended into the holy place, the heaven must retain him until the times of restitution of all things. That's Acts 3:21. And if his return is due, the harvest of the earth is due. But as the days of Noah were, so shall the parousia, that is the presence of the Son of Man, be. We had better not be too certain that among all the mistakes of both Jew and Gentile church, who were both to stumble, for he shall be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, that is, the house after the flesh and the house after the promise, that there has been no mistake in relation to the manner of his coming now, as well as at his first advent. So the stone of stumbling is apparently this lack of recognition that the parousia dates to the year 1874 and that we're now in the Great Jubilee period. So here you have at least, by my count, 3, else 4 errors, all tied to this Jubilee assumption, i.e. it's obvious the 1875 is wrong, even by Watchtower standards. That's old light. But the other things tied to it, you've got 1970 and 536. They don't believe 536 is the date anymore of the end of the 70-year desolation. They believe it's 537. That ties to the idea that 606 was the beginning of it, which itself is an error because they failed to reckon with the 0 year. There's not 2 years from 1 BC to 1 AD. They didn't know that or didn't recognize it at the time, although Christendom knew about it. So they've got at least 2 more errors tied to that, which is that the 70 years desolation even doesn't end, according to Zechariah, who's not mentioned here, until 516, when the temple is rebuilt. That's not factored in at all. And then there's the fact that in order to keep your date 606 for the beginning of the desolation, then you have to move back the era of the exile and the era of Nebuchadnezzar's dynasty 19 years, according to this. That's right, 19 years, but you've now moved it from 606 to 625. Nobody in the world believes that the Babylonian dynasty began in 625 BC, except the Watchtower. And they've moved it since, because of course they've moved 606 to 607. Does this all sound confusing? Well, it is, because everything here is tied to the faith that the times of restitution of all things involve a invisible presence of Christ. That's quite plain at the end of this argument. So the light they had in the 1870s was in fact darkness. And things hadn't changed much in the 1920s. We have a video on the 7 trumpets. They've still, of course, kept the idea that the 7 great trumpets of Revelation were in the 1920s through the 30s. We did a video on that. I'll link that to your screen.